Back by popular demand, I have Stacy Fitzgerald here again, and I'm going to go through her bio because it's that good. Stacy is a wife and a mother, a horse trainer, a singer-songwriter, and a certified nutritionist, an avid student of the scriptures, and an inspiring author, aspiring author, not inspiring. She is inspiring as an aspiring author. As a passionate teacher in all these roles and pursuits, she has come to see her own life stories as magnificent metaphors, weaving her true tales of a near-death horse accident, her victorious battle with disordered eating, and her 20-year marriage that ended in divorce, and the betrayal trauma that accompanied it, along with a childhood background that set the stage for complex PTSD into a beautiful tapestry of hope and healing. Her newest offering is Becoming Safe, and it's an online group course that combines her stories, her songs, and the transformational tools that she's learned to use to heal her own soul wounds, finding the freedom of safety and security in her relationship to herself, her relationship to Abba Father, her creator, Yahweh, and her relationship with others. Currently, she's married to her childhood sweetheart, Joel, lives in the Rocky Mountain, Virginia, has 6 children combined, and 2 horses, Joy and Peace. Welcome back.
Thank you, Charlie. I am so honored to not only have been with you once, but to now come back. So thank you to everyone that listened and for you wanting me here. Appreciate it.
Well, you probably, if you started this podcast, I probably started it with a warning. I'm going to put it out there one more time, just in case you skip past this. I am going to put a parental advisory on this conversation. If you do have littles in the area, I would advise you to put on headphones or go to a nice private place for yourself, because we're going to talk about some sensitive things and it's not something for little ears. So we just want to give you that little parental advisory. We're going to talk about some real stuff today. Stacy has such a beautiful, we talked about her Becoming Safe program, but we're going to talk about why that came about. You heard some words like betrayal trauma, which might be a new word for you, and some relational wounds, and how Becoming Safe is healing men and women, but I know she has a focus on women, and I know a lot of you have maybe gone through a betrayal in different varieties. We're going to talk about pornography today. We're going to probably touch on maybe a little bit about the betrayal of an affair, but we're going to really be focusing on pornography today. So again, I want to do that advisory. So set the story for us, Stacy. How did this all start?
Yeah, the interesting thing is it sort of unfolded in a backwards way. The initial betrayal, and actually before I jump into that, I love that you just brought up that terminology. We both did betrayal trauma. And the word trauma really means a wound. It's a Greek word that means a wound. So a betrayal trauma is a wound that comes from a relational source, basically someone that you thought or should have had your back, been your support, been that absolute place of safety and security, not only wasn't safe and secure, but could have possibly been the one that actually caused the wound, the trauma. And that's why betrayal trauma is such a deep wound. It's not necessarily an arbitrary thing that happened, but a person, a relationship breach. So that betrayal trauma happened early in my life. We all have the childhood stuff that sets us up. And that's where I share that part of as I looked back, seeing how my upbringing and my family of origin and attachment theory is something that's really helpful, and that sort of set me up to end up in a relationship where betrayal happened quickly. And that was my marriage. That was a 20-year marriage that ended in divorce. I met him very young. I was 16. And the interesting thing is I did know that he had an issue with pornography, and that was actually sort of revealed to me in a dream. And I confronted him because I had this very disturbing dream. And he told me what was going on, and the details sort of unfolded from there. But we were both good Christian kids trying to save ourselves for marriage. And my mentality as a very young person was, oh, well, once we're married and we can have sex, this will go away. I didn't understand the workings of this sexual addiction and choice, because they're both. And that's sort of one of the pieces I hope we can get to today. That then continued. And the awareness, discovery that this was happening in my marriage within the first, first few months of our marriage I didn't realize that that was the blow. That was and some very specific details that went into that I won't discuss here. But as I looked in hindsight, that's when I saw, oh, that's when that massive wound happened and then continued to sort of hit the same wound for 20 years off and on, where it would seem like things would improve, and 3 children, lots of moves, businesses that sort of distract, and then that wound comes up. So where Becoming Safe came from and why this developed is because that all happened from like 1991, 20 years forward from that. This concept of trauma at all, betrayal trauma, all the healing, all the awareness, all the access we have online to different people and counselors was not available. And being in the church at the time, and even in and out of the Christian church and the Messianic movement, which in our first interview we talk a little bit more about, I did not find any support for the soul, the wounds of the soul of me as a woman. And most of the help, if we got any, which was little, and a lot of that was because I kept this very protective, I wanted to protect our marriage, I wanted to protect him, his reputation. I was ashamed, which is something that women often carry, as we sort of carry that shame.
Right.
There must be something wrong with me, that he is going to this outside source instead of me, this beautiful young woman that's available. And you receive all kinds of advice across the board, but most of it was about how to help him. And not one time in those 20 years did anyone ever say to me, how are you? Are you okay? We need to help you. You're wounded. You're hurt. You're going to need to heal. It wasn't until our marriage had almost completely unraveled that we were talking to a marriage and family therapist who just happened to be the pastor of the church where my now ex-husband was the executive pastor. And he was teaching a series on choice, on love. And he said, love always gives a choice. And I remember kind of being slammed back of the auditorium. And I thought, I don't think I've been choosing. I think I'm going along. And now I know what that word is, trauma. I was responding and dealing and coping with trauma. And I was a really, really good coper. And pardon that ding. I don't know how to make it not ding if someone
That's
texts
okay. I want to just pop in here really quick. It's interesting because we went through some specific counseling as a couple, and my husband in separately for this, and it just popped in my mind that this is very similar to what you're going through, but it's an injury. It was in the military, they call it a moral injury. So my husband was exposed to some things, and you made the comment, someone who he trusted, someone higher in authority over him, who he trusted to make the right moral decisions. And he would watch things happening in a military, especially combat situations, where things were happening that there was a moral, a conflict happening, and they call it a moral injury. It was different than just regular PTSD, which is also happens, but I see that this is very similar. This is a moral injury. It's something that it's a wound. And I'm really appreciative that you're saying you're going to places to get help, the people that you trust. And it's almost like a compound injury, because now they are dismissing you. And I'm going to guess, I'm not going to say they're saying get over it, but it's a lot of times when there's an affair, this happens, the injured party is expected to quickly they're given a time frame on how long this should last. Like, you should be healed by now. You should be over this by now. Yet no one has given you any help. And they're the injurer, the
betrayer,
betrayer is getting all the help. And we'll call it a victim. I hate using that word, but the victim of the betrayal is not really getting the help. However, they're expected to recover within a certain period of time, or you're just blowing this out of proportion.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll make a comment on that word victim, because part of my early healing when this resurfacing happened was sort of owning that word victim. And it came from a podcast, BTR, Betrayal Trauma Recovery. It was very, very helpful. Her premise was focusing on that this is abuse. Pornography use is abuse. And I'm using it in terms of women because that's my experience. And most of the people that I work with, I really focus my energy on women because as a woman, I didn't get what I needed. So that's what I focus on, was to embrace that for a time to say, oh, I was victimized, doesn't mean I'm blaming, hurting this other person, but I'm recognizing that something that someone else did caused a wound. And so you said in there, this sort of time that's expected. How long? Well, think about this. And we were chatting about this real quickly before we started, but imagine you're in the yard with your husband chopping wood, and you know, he's got an axe and he's cutting. And as he goes to cut that wood, the axe head flies off and lands in your leg and chops through your leg, hits the bone. I mean, it's a massive call the ambulance type of an injury. This is like a deep betrayal wound when you have found out that you have been betrayed by the one that is supposed to have your back. And I'll connect this with that moral injury or that moral trauma, which is exactly this sense of the one that was supposed to have your back, put you in a situation or directly hurt you. Now, in my picture there, that person might have had no intention to have that axe land in my leg, none. So in the sense of I'm a victim, I'm not a victim in that he chased me around the yard with an axe and tried to chop my leg off, but I'm a victim in the sense that something he did happened to me. I didn't do it to me. So it was sort of this separation in my mind of going, oh, until we recognize that, we don't pay attention because the focus is, oh, it's okay. I know you didn't mean it. Let's fix the axe. Let's make sure we don't do this again. I'm so sorry. Instead of going, you know what, we'll deal with all that later. Right now, I might bleed to death. Let's go. And here's the issue with the timing. So yes, let's say I get immediate care and it's still going to take the time it takes. Let's say I don't. Let's say I don't get care. Let's say we just pull the axe head out and wash it up and go in the house and go, I'm sure it'll get better. And 3, 4, 5 years down the road, if not that long, if it was really an injury like that, you would have gangrene and your bone wouldn't heal and you would probably die, okay, without medical attention. We're talking about a serious wound. So if we don't get the attention, and the problem with these kinds of traumas is they're not recognized often. Now the awareness is much higher. But like you said, they're sort of like, hey, this is common, especially with pornography. Maybe there's a little more recognition in an adulterous affair where someone would say, oh, that's horrible. You know, he cheated on you, she cheated on you. When it's pornography, it's sort of like, oh, okay, so it wasn't actually an affair. When someone's engaging in sexual behavior outside of marriage from another source, that is a form of infidelity. And it hits you, the same axe, the same wound hits you. And if it's not attended to, of course, you're not healed, even if you should be, because you got the attention. The only should be is if you got the attention that you needed to heal. So back to your husband's situation, that moral wound or moral injury can happen in that same way. If you picture me out in the yard with my husband and I think, well, you were supposed to protect me. Why were you using an axe that could have hurt me? Didn't you know? Why did you put me in that position? You know?
You know what I think of right away? We always talk, how do you tie this to Torah? How do we tie this? Instantly, I'm saying there are instructions in Torah about putting the proper, making sure that you actually put a railing around your porch so that your friends don't fall off of it, because you do things to protect others. This is the same thing. You make sure the axe is safe so that you don't hurt anyone around you. The same goes here. You take responsibility that I've made choices. Yeah. I've made choices now that have caused an injury to someone else. So now it's my responsibility to make, there's restitution that needs to happen here. There needs not just the teshuvah, not just repentance and turning back, but now that person has an injury and I have to address their injury as opposed to, well, I'm not going to ever do it again, so get over it.
Exactly. So
I'll go to counseling. Hope you're better.
Yeah, right. And in the moment of that injury, or even if it hasn't been attended to, no amount of apology, he can say, I'm so sorry the axe hit you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm glad that he's sorry, but I still have an axe in my leg, you know? And he is not a doctor. He might not be equipped. He can get me there, perhaps. That's when hopefully in these situations of betrayal, hopefully we do have an awareness from the betraying partner that, oh my, I have caused a massive wound. Right. Sometimes what we get is, well, you shouldn't have been standing so close to me while I was chopping the wood.
Well, you said something when we were first talking. You said, instead, a lot of times we're saying, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
Instead of what happened to me. That was verbiage you used.
Yeah. I think it's a huge shift. And I love using pictures, and we'll just keep this one going for a little bit. If I'm walking around going limping and in pain and I'm miserable and I'm complaining and I'm like, what's wrong with me? And someone goes, well, you've got an axe in your leg, like,
yeah.
I think we should, oh, okay, right. But it's okay because he's sorry. And we're working on the problem with the axe. We're really working on it, and we're buying more axes, but you have an axe in your leg, So it's sort of that, oh, something happened to me. And again, this is not needing to villainize the person that it came from. In some situations, and you and I mentioned briefly about narcissism and some of the words that people are a lot more familiar with now, gaslighting and coercive manipulative behavior, there are people out there. And it's hard for those of us that maybe see the best in everyone to believe this. There are some people that truly are purposefully hurting others. And that's maybe even another level of betrayal, because it sort of shocks you like, wait, what? You had an intention. You knew what you were doing. Maybe you have done this before if it was in a relational thing, and you find out that you're not the first victim of this person's behavior. And maybe you thought you didn't know anything about the past. But most of the time, the person did not intentionally do this to hurt you. We're talking a lot about marriages. They didn't say, I hate my wife and I'm going to go do something that hurts her.
No, it's not.
So
It might not malicious, but you still have an axe in your leg. I think let's keep this through this. You're going to hear this all. And I'm going to be really pushing in the next few months on all of us having some, we're going to hear the words crucial conversations. It's that crucial conversation where you have, otherwise it's going to, if you're not sitting down and saying, I have an axe in my leg, I have pain, part of the restitution, if I need help, which might mean as your restitution, you have to get a second job to help pay for my therapy. I'm sorry, not sorry. This is where that the person who's giving the trauma is going to have to take responsibility for their actions, much like the person who fell off your porch, your patio, because you didn't have the proper fence around it. We have guidelines that say if you cause an injury, you have to pay for the damage. If the person loses work because of your injury, you pay for their work. You have to we have to take responsibility and the restitution if we're bringing this injury to someone. So you wrote some notes, as you had mentioned that because you were holding things in, when we're not having those crucial conversations, when we're just holding it in and trying to just help them repair their acts, we're trying to make them okay. You mentioned sometimes it can manifest in different ways. Now, the analogy you gave the axe, we have gangrene, we have infections, we have a horrible scar that now we have nerve damage, we are limping for the rest of our lives, and we can't wear cute pants or whatever, but what about when it's not so visible like an axe and we're holding in and we're not having those crucial conversations because I don't want to keep bringing it up to him. I don't want to, but you're dying inside. Well, how does that manifest? You mentioned a few things, you personally, it starts to manifest our behavior. If we don't have the conversation, our behaviors will have the conversation for us.
You have said so much in there, so much. And I'll just start and we'll see where it goes. One manifestation was a physical ailment for me. And I have a tool that I use on Becoming Safe for the ladies, and I call it the timeline tool. And it's very simple. You sort of just on a piece of paper. Some people want to do it on a spreadsheet. You can just do it on a whiteboard, wherever. But I suggest people keep it. Here's when I was born, and even before, that's a whole nother conversation, but there's a lot of science on our nervous systems are wired in accordance with our moms and that goes on even in utero and in those early years. But you sort of plot on there the big events, not digging. This is a big, big piece. And I'm going to actually say it now so I make sure I don't forget to say this, because it was sort of my problem and why trauma went underground again, even though I got out of the unhealthy relationship. We need to regulate our nervous system before we process. And I'll say that again, regulate before you process. I am a cerebral thinker, studier. I think you and I are really similar to that. If something comes up, the next thing I know, I'm at the library and on thrift books, and I've got a stack of books, and I'm up 2 hours early and staying up in bed, trying to read and dig in. And I had done that coming out of my marriage, but I hadn't dealt with the body. And when I did my timeline tool and I just plotted the big things, most of us have stuff that kind of pops out. And then later, as I would just sort of put little pieces in there, I realized that I was diagnosed with IBS months, just a few months after marriage, and realizing that this betrayal had taken place in a particular event and then was ongoing. And as I've been studying trauma, and particularly betrayal trauma, IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, is one of the top physical conditions in women, and I'm sure men as well, that have experienced betrayal. If you think about it, it's like a stab in the gut, right? Or punch in, if you think, oh, I've been punched in the gut. And our body, there's so many great resources, a great book by Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score.
Great book.
Yes. And I love that we're bringing Torah into this because it all connects. Sometimes, unfortunately, in our spiritual communities, we do what I call, and many people call, a spiritual bypass. Oh, okay, we are so focused on our spirit that I've got this thing, I just have to pray it away. I've just got to give it all up to the Lord. He's going to take care of this. These are all great things, but we're bypassing the fact that we were made by him as a body with a wiring system, which is like our internal Torah. If the Torah is the instructions for how to walk out our life, the nervous system is the instructions for our own body, how our brain and our body talk to each other back and forth. And we know now that it's not just down from the brain, but it's up. We have a vagus nerve, and our gut and our feelings inside of us, our physical feelings, communicate to the brain, which send out neurotransmitters. I mean, it's you don't even need to understand all of those things, but just to understand that trauma is stored in the body. And if we don't address it on all of those levels, and I call them the 3 levels: your body, your soul, and your spirit. And the way I break down soul is mind, will, and emotions. So to me, the mind is the thoughts, the will is our choices, which we touched on a minute ago, and our emotions are our feelings. And I see my connection with my creator. This is my spiritual connection.
Right.
Here's my soul, right? My mind, will, and emotions. This is my love your neighbor as yourself. If I have no connection here, my soul's probably going to get some gangrene in it.
Right.
And I want to be healed. Then I can show up in those relationships. My body, containing my soul, can go out into this world with all my gifts and all my wounds and all my joys and all my sorrows, and interact with people and show up and be able to be who he's made me to be in this world.
I want to pop in here on this because for those of you who don't know, Grant Luton has a beautiful series. I think it might be 3 or 4 parts. It's called Body, Soul, and Spirit. Just type in Grant Luton, and he has an example of this, and he uses like embroidery hoops, and he has that, and he talks about how the closer your body and your spirit, they start to get healthy. They go, you have your little soul in the middle, and it's flesh or whatever, but the more they come together, the more you're like him. And now it's all in unity with him. And now we can be one as he is one, right? We can be with him because our body is now in alignment with our spirit, and it's causing our soul now, all those emotions, all those feelings have all come into submission. It's just beautiful. So it's a good teaching. He's such a great teacher, but I will post that, and anything else we mentioned, I will post that down in the notes.
Yeah. Real quick, while you're looking down there, that integration is huge. And how we see that, I love the other word you used, alignment. We want to come into alignment, into his rhythm, into his vibration. Instead of having, the other day I was all excited about this, and we had friends over, and I said, I'm going to demonstrate what healing looks like. And I grabbed my guitar, it's up on the wall behind me, and I played 2 notes I purposely untuned the one, and it was like, and I played them both, and then I turned the little knob on the top of there, and as it just came right into sync, the 2 notes became one. And the peace came. I said, that's what healing is. We're out of vibration with him. We're out of vibration with ourselves, and we're out of vibration with others. And so when we can heal those connections, and he's given us those instructions, not only outside of us in the instructions of the Torah, but inside of us in the wiring that he has designed, we can begin to integrate, because trauma really is unintegrated situations. When we have those things that pop out, instead of it being, this is something that happened to me in my past, it's functioning within my body and my soul as if it's going on right now. And that's why I want to say this to anyone listening. If you're experiencing trauma and you've said these things, what's wrong with me? I'm crazy. Nobody can understand me. You're probably functioning in that place of trauma that may be going on right now, but may possibly be in the past, but it's not integrated into your body and into your timeline. And so your body doesn't know the difference, and it's reacting now to every stimulus. And that's what was happening in my life, as if I was in that threat. I never felt safe. And I didn't even understand what that word was. And it's why I have called my course Becoming Safe. And the interesting thing is my name is, my initials now are SAF, Stacey Ann Fitzgerald. So becoming who I am, and even there was a literal change of identity in changing my name, just became another one of those great metaphors that we want to become safe inside. That means vibrating, in a sense, in alignment with the way that he made our nervous system and our body, so that we can be safe in our relationship with others. Because we don't want to.
No, you mentioned another physical thing that happened to you before we started. You said that there was panic attacks started happening because you had shoved them in. Panic attacks, your heart rate, so you had IBS, and then you had panic attacks.
IBS was diagnosed very early, and about 3 years ago, I have what I call my resurgence of trauma. And I was in Colorado, which is where I grew up. I was there for my oldest daughter's wedding. And now I see all the triggers that were in place. My ex-husband was there, his family. I was in the home that I was in when he and I were dating and got married. And I started having massive panic attacks. Like I realized after that I had had a couple times in my life throughout that marriage that I had these things come up, and I just spiritual bypassed them. I didn't know what they were, what's wrong with me. And I just got over them and coped, which is a whole nother topic. We could talk about coping mechanisms. But when it came up this past time, there was no coping. My heart rate just, without doing anything, was in the 100s, 120, 130, just racing. I couldn't sleep. I would try to fall asleep, and it was like electric paddles had been put on my chest, and I would jerk awake and my heart would race. And I had those things. What is wrong with me? Am I going crazy? Why is this happening? And I was sitting out on the front step of my mom's house, and I just started praying, what's wrong with me? What's happening? And I felt the Holy Spirit say the word trauma. And now it's sort of a buzzword. I was not, even though I went through a near-death horse experience, things that people would call a very obvious trauma. And it's like when the axe in your leg is recognized. Like you said, sometimes it's not. My horse accident was, call 911, rush her to the emergency room.
Some of them are so obvious you can't cover it up with a cute skirt. And that's what we do when other stuff happens. We might put a cute skirt on because we can't put a pair of pants on. Everyone will notice it. But there's sometimes it's very obvious.
Yes. Yeah. And these ones that aren't necessarily recognized that way, we can push them down. And I had done all the things, processing here, being busy, entering into accomplishing, write another song. And that's the other thing I realized, was that I had been processing, experiencing, and feeling my trauma through my songs. And when I began to really look back at all the songs I had been writing and look at the words and feel them, I went, oh, my body, my mind, my soul has been trying to talk to me through these songs. And I knew it. I was very aware that life was not, my relationship with my ex-husband was not healthy. And we were doing all these things to try to fix and help and grow. And I was very high functioning. Okay. I'm speaking at women's events on marriage and relational issues.
Yes.
I was not a little, flower in the corner that nobody saw. I'm out on stages doing my music. All of that those were some of my coping mechanisms. I was going to conquer this thing and, pull myself up, and we're going to be victorious. I didn't realize the damage, the axe was still in my leg. And maybe the axe head was pulled out, but the bone didn't heal well. That scar that you talked about left so much damage and nerve damage that every time that spot would get hit, it was like, oh, and things would resurface. So yes, all those panic attacks came up, and I did what I do. I dove in head first, literally head first, into reading and studying, and praise him, he led me to some great resources where I went, oh, I need to deal with this in my body. And I was forced to. Isn't that a beautiful thing, though? It's
beautiful. But you went to people, though, and said at some point you went to get help for yourself, even though you found a spot where you went to get help, but you didn't get good advice. What was the bad advice that you were given when you finally felt it was very vulnerable for you to be transparent to someone and actually say, okay, I've been hiding this axe in my leg. My husband has an issue with pornography, and this is the betrayal injury that has happened to me, this trauma that's in me. And you finally show it to them. And what are you told?
Yeah. Well, and remember at the time when I did go to someone finally, I didn't know to call it betrayal trauma. I didn't know any of these words. I just had this sense that this was a big deal and we needed to address it. And we went to, I won't say who, but it was a family members at the time, probably not the best place we could have gone, maybe to a counselor. Not saying later in life, a counselor didn't give me good advice either. So sometimes we don't get the best advice, but they weren't trained in that. And it was sort of minimized. That was the most benign part, it seemed. It wasn't necessarily bad advice. It was just, well, this is a common issue. And so, yes, you may be blowing it out of the water. The advice given to me that I shared with you earlier, that was a little bit further down the line as I read books about how to be a helpmeet, which is one of my buttons that pushes me, because in Hebrew, that's not even the word, you know, and yes, it's someone who is suitable. It's not a noun like I'm a helpmeet. We are together face to face is literally what it means, right?
Opposing forces, forces. Yes.
Yes. Like looking at each other in a mirror. It's a very different concept. So some of the resources within the church were, here's how you are a good helpmeet. Make sure you're ready for sex all the time. Make sure the house is clean and the children are calm and all the things. Well, these are lovely things in a healthy marriage. We could argue how the details of that. But when there's been a sexual wound, a sexual betrayal, to have that advice that, you know, it sort of implies, well, if you are available to meet his sexual needs, he won't have to search outside of the marriage. So there's an assumption, number one, that you weren't available. And so depending on your relationship, you might think, but I was, you know, I didn't withhold sex from him. I didn't even know that he was going outside of the marriage. And then that can be a real wound too, because you were participating sexually in a trusted way without full knowledge. So someone took your choice, because if I knew, let's say it was an actual person that they were having physical sex with, which in a sense, again, this podcast has the parental guidance on it, but we're hitting these tough topics. When men view pornography, and we know women can do the same thing, but we're putting it in this context, they don't just watch it and go, that was a nice show. They're engaging physically. They are coming to climax. They are usually masturbating with the pornography. So they are having a sexual experience with an image, and it's not you. And it could even be you. It could be a picture of you. Most likely it's not. But even then, they are not engaging in what was agreed upon in a marriage, that we are going to come together as two vulnerable people. And this is an area where we're going to connect at the most intimate level that two people, or one of the most intimate levels that two people can connect in. And so when we find out that there has been extra marital outside of that perfect union with anyone or image or anyone else, even self, for them, we have now found out we've been participating in this vulnerable sexual act without full knowledge. And that feels like we've really been robbed of our choice of how we participate. And we can often feel feelings of almost like sexual abuse within, like I have been victimized in that sense. I've been used. I've been almost like a prostitute or incest. And these are big words, but this is what it feels like in the soul of a woman.
And many of you are saying, well, and I have been told this as going through an experience, and, you know, we'll share another time, but when going through an experience when my spouse was had this issue and thinking of the other person, you know, relieving himself in the shower. Well, at least he's not having an affair.
Right.
Well, at least but he was.
Yeah.
He was having an emotional affair with that person and a physical affair with that person, even though he wasn't connecting to that person in a physical way. He personally was connecting to them with his body, soul, and spirit. They were all connected to that. And the responsibility often, and I believe that's why when Jesus is saying, even if you look at a woman the wrong way, it's as if you had the affair, because we're held to it's a higher standard. It is the same thing. And so women, if you're saying, well, it's not that bad, I think I put a note, you're just this, it's not that bad. You're overreacting. You just need to kind of keep him more accountable. You need to perform. You need to do something better. And now it's all been placed back on you. I want to caution you that was bad, that you look for better therapy, look for a better way, because
Beautiful.
I hope you're hearing that it is the same as an affair.
Yeah.
It is a betrayal, a deep betrayal. And it's okay to not be okay, and for you to seek help, because you have to pull the axe out of your leg. You have been hit by accident or on purpose. You have been wounded and you need to get the help.
So true. And when we stay focused right now, when we're not focusing on helping the man heal, there are lots of great resources. So we're not saying that's not important. It's
right.
Hugely important.
Absolutely.
Just like we're talking about. We're talking about the woman who has the axe in her leg. There are other people that can help the man. What we're talking about is this wound. So however the wound got there, whether it was an actual sexual intercourse with another person, whether it was an image, whatever it was, the wound to a woman's soul is the same. And we as women have a hard time wrapping our heads around it. For that same reason you said, well, it's not the same thing. So think how crazy then you feel. Then why do I feel like such a crazy? And I do want to comment on what you said about a counselor, and make sure this is my personal advice. None of this is medical advice or any even counseling advice. It's not our roles. I'm sharing my own story. One of the counselors that we went to, that was a marriage counselor, was not trauma informed. Now I know that word. I didn't know to ask that then. But in a session one time, she said to me, we were kind of in the heat of something. I don't even remember what it was. Does he hit you? And I said, no. And she had this puzzled look on her face. And she said, because you show every symptom and sign of an abused spouse. And it was sort of like, that's weird. I wonder why you're so strange and crazy. Rather than going, there must be a reason you have every sign and symptom of an abused spouse. And there isn't just one reason that he's hitting you. And unfortunately, that woman did not have the training to pull me aside and say, we need to get to the bottom of what's going on with you. Because I was in that mind frame of, oh, what's wrong with me? And in a sense, well, more than a sense,
now there's something else wrong with me I have to fix. I need to fix one more thing now.
And she, in a sense, without intentionally meaning it, pointed, oh, there really is something wrong with you, because he's not doing XYZ. And I don't think I had told her, I don't remember if we had even talked about the pornography, because by the time we went to counseling, remember this started before we were even married, it had just become a thing.
That crucial conversation had been delayed and delayed and delayed. And when you have this delayed conversation where things are out in the open, you've created a safe place to where saying, I love you so much that we have to have this conversation. That's what love does, is we have hard conversations until we both feel safe. And in my marriage, it was difficult to use the word safe because my husband grew up in such an extremely abusive childhood. If I said, I don't feel safe to have this conversation with you right now, he assumed it was he thought he was going to physically hurt me. And he's like, and he's not that guy. That's not what I was saying. So we have to talk about vocabulary. That's part of those crucial conversations. You want to have conversations where the vocabulary, you both understand, when I say this is what I mean. When I say safe, this is what I mean. And I may have to change my verbiage so that it's not triggering trauma from his childhood. And you love someone, you have these crucial conversations.
Yes.
However, it is not, you do not have to take responsibility for their actions. And again, we've talked about this early, and I think this is going to be a conversation for another time, but I know my daughter, we talk about this often, about what happens. There was a season during like the 90s, in the early 2000s, where we did the whole true love waits, and there's this modesty. Now we do this modesty shaming. We're not holding little boys accountable for taking their thoughts captive. Instead, we're putting all the blame on the girl because she's wearing something inappropriate, which is not really inappropriate. It could just be, just enough above her knee that it could cause her brother's eye to sin. All these things, we have to all take accountability for our actions. Don't let me forget before we stop, because I do want to hit on something for women. I'll just do it now. Women, I do want you to know, we also have to be accountable. Some of us might be watching things on television and saying, oh, that's great eye candy. There's a man on there that you're seeing things on. or maybe you're reading books, because maybe we're not as visual, but we are very mental. So maybe you're reading books that are inappropriate, that is a soft porn. I just want you to submit the things that before your eyes and before your ears and submit those things to the Holy One, and the Holy Spirit will lead you in all truth. He'll let you know this is causing moral injury to yourself, because you want to be careful what you might be doing to yourself as well.
I think that's so good, because there really, in all of this, is no need to point fingers, say, I'm better than he, this, they, that. This is about hopefully being whole as individuals and helping others that we're connected with be whole. And my situation, my marriage did end in divorce. And a lot of it is because of what you just said, that crucial conversation got put off, and the healing got put off for so long that by the time we began to address it, it was so buried under so much other stuff that the connection was completely torn.
You'd already lost the leg. It was so bad you had to cut the leg off.
Yes. And one of those pieces that was a soul search for me was my heart emotionally was drawn to another man. And looking back, I am a faithful woman. That is who I am. I know my character. And that was one of those thoughts that hit me in that time. Our marriage was unraveling. All of this was happening. And there is a part of that. Now I look, and this person that had been a friend of mine was a very intentionally manipulative person that stepped into a vulnerable situation. But what I saw was, oh my gosh, I am so wounded that I could end up in an affair. And that to me was worse than a divorce. To me, a divorce was like I had been protecting my whole life. The D word is not a part of our it's not even in our vocabulary. And all of a sudden I saw such a wounded heart that I used to always think, how does this even happen? How would someone end up in a situation? And it was like I saw into the future and went, oh my gosh, this is how it happens. And that was my line in the sand. We were already there, but it was sort of that, like, I will not go down that road. I do not want to be that person. And it was sort of that recognition that none of us are immune to any of this.
No.
I'm no better than my husband. I'm no better than the person down the street. We all have a way that we're wired. And part of that was, I saw it as like a dried out sponge. If you've got a dried out sponge and you stick it in muddy water, it's going to soak up the muddy water. And when we are so depleted, so wounded, so empty, we're running patterns. And there's the nervous system again. And coming back to another point you said about vocabulary, one of the other tools I teach is called a 10-point scale, or I don't teach, is that we want to go for this regulated nervous system, which is what I call that 4 to 7. And some of us have a very narrow bandwidth. If I only feel good when I'm here, and things can trigger me so much. The stress response is when we go above that 7. Life is very stressful. We feel that. That's those panic attacks. We can't sustain that. And that's the freeze response of that 0 to 3. And what I learned, that there's a lot in there, but I go into it a lot more on becoming safe, because to me, it's become key vocabulary. My husband, Joel, and I use it now too. When we are in either the stress response, the 8 to 10, or the freeze response, the 0 to 3, all we can do is run patterns. We can't learn.
It's physically impossible to be reasonable in those places. I mean, literally, there is no blood supply to your reason brain. There is none.
Yep.
Physically impossible.
The pathways from childhood or from the betrayal that's been going on, you will run those patterns. So if we want to learn, which is what Torah is about, it's an instructive law. If we want to use the word law, I was just reading in another book that it's not to think of Torah as punitive. It is an instructional law. Yes, there are consequences, but the goal is not to punish you when you've done something wrong. It's to instruct you so that you'll be in alignment, back to everything we were just talking about, with your creator and how he made the world to work. So we need to be regulated. We need tools, and we're not being taught that most in these spiritual circles. Now it's becoming more of a conversation. And I'm so glad we're having this crucial conversation here in this setting where people are saying, oh, we're not just talking about the Bible and what this Hebrew word means. We're actually saying, I'm a person with an internal system that can go offline, and it's helping me. That's another key. When you are feeling the crazies, it's going, hello, hello. And to me, that was that wake up point in my life of, I'm not going down this road. And the physical symptoms, it all, my soul, my body, everything was good. I was going to explode, implode, and I had to make a choice. And I was able to rebuild my life with lots of messes along the way, right? Messy antics.
It's messy. It gets messy. So we're going to close this out. And this has been a 2-part session for all of you. So wrapping this up, I found out that my husband, this is hypothetical. I found out that my husband has an issue with pornography. It has become an issue. Where do I start, Stacy? Where do I go? And for those of you, we are not shamelessly plugging programs. This is a vetted program for Stacy. She is a vetted resource for you. So we're not saying, oh, you have to do this, but I will before she does, saying, I'm going to put all the information for becoming safe in the notes for you, because I would say that would be a really good place to start with someone who knows what you're going through. But tell me, what do you want that woman to hear? Where does she start? She's found this out, and everyone is giving her all the wrong things to do, and it's all about him right now.
Yeah. The first 2 things I always say are, you're not alone and you're not crazy, because of those are probably the 2 biggest lies we believe. And just seeing, which is what I hoped in sharing my songs, my stories, and then the tools. It started out with me just saying, I just want to share my songs and my stories. And then I thought, I need to share the tools that have helped me so that other women can regulate too. And where I gained those was, and this is where I would say to women, yes, come and join us on Becoming Safe. And I want you to know there is no, this is not an expensive course. There's literally no, you set your own price. You can come in and put whatever price, because that's what he has on my heart right now. And if this changes down the road when you're watching this podcast, you'll see it. But that's what I have felt. I don't want anyone to not be able to access it. So you do participate in some way financially, but that's up to you completely. There are a lot of very, very, very expensive courses out there, and there's a lot of free resources, and there's a lot in between. So, and one of the things I do on Becoming Safe is I have the resources that have helped me the most, because I went through the good, the bad, and the ugly, and found things that really, really helped me. And we have to do a lot of weeding. In our previous talk, we talked about how do we deal with, like, oh, I got to chew up the meat and spit out the bones. Some of the best help I got was not from Christian or Torah observant sources. It wasn't being talked about. And the advice, like we said before, wasn't great. I had to go into some other resources and sort of dig out the best stuff. And there is a lot more available. So what I would say to women is, number one, you're not alone. You're not crazy. And there are resources. And then the next thing to anyone is, you've got to regulate your nervous system. Don't try to just go up here like I did. That'll come. We'll figure the things out. We'll go through the steps. But your body needs to come into that 4 to 7. And you need to be able to know, like I can say to my husband, Joel, now, if I start to get triggered, I go, honey, I'm about to hit a hard 8 right now. Like, I feel it. And he's like, oh, he knows what that language means. Let's say we're having a heated discussion and it starts to trigger me. He'll go, oh, he doesn't take it personally anymore and be like, well, why? He understands, something triggered you. He just comes, helps me to regulate. Or I say, I need to go for a walk. I need to go sit upstairs. He now understands I'm not leaving the conversation because I'm just checking out. I recognize that I got triggered by something. And that word just means I'm out of that calm alert. I'm not able to learn and function cognitively. I need to bring it back online. So there are tools and resources. Get that help. Your husband needs those resources too, but they're separate things. There can be counseling together. And I'm not a licensed counselor. I am a nutritionist, certified nutritionist. So I was trained in counseling for nutrition, but I share as a woman who's been there. That's the way I share. I've been there. I've walked through it. I'm still walking through it. And we're going to go hand in hand. We're going to go through the ups and the downs, and you're not going to be alone, and you're going to know you're not crazy.
I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you for doing that. And again, we're going to leave you all with this. All the information that we've talked about today will be down in the show notes. Share this with a friend. Would you take a minute? I'm sure you know at least one friend who needs to hear this conversation. She needs someone to tell her it's okay that she's not okay. And there's hope. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train. Thank you so much, Stacy, for being with us. Thank you for those of you who listened. You can let the little kids back in the room now. We want to talk about some real stuff because sometimes walking this out, it gets a little bit messy.